Okay, welcome everybody. So today is lesson 6, and most people have gotten their assignment 1 submitted. So I will just put it again for anybody just joining us. There's a link in the chat here to a quick poll. Feel free to click on the link in the chat and tell us what you think about when, the notion of web application security. When you hear web security, what does it make you think of? So we've got some good comments here. We think about hacking. Yep, CIA. That's an interesting way to think about securing our data. That our data is confidential. That the integrity of that data is protected. Yet at the same time, our data is available within our application. We definitely have to think about hackers. Some of the tools we've got available, VPNs and antivirus. How do we protect our data from breaches? How can we encrypt it or protect our data? I mentioned this one, liability, because ultimately liability potentially, protecting our information, confidential information about our users. Liability rests with us as developers. If we build an application, that application stores sensitive data, and we don't take proper measures and follow best practices to secure that data, if it's hacked, then potentially there are consequences for us. There's potentially legal ramifications around us being liable. So it's a big responsibility, and probably very little time goes by that we don't hear about some major data breach. So it is has become a big part and parcel of what we do as application developers. And that's true on any platform, but especially we're dealing on web, because we're dealing with applications that are typically deployed publicly on public internets. So we've got a lot of responsibility around this. So what we want to do today is we're going to start looking at implementing security in an ASP.NET application. We'll look at kind of, in general, some basic principles of application security, and then we're going to look at what does Microsoft offer specifically for authentication and authorization, and then we'll start implementing those in our beer store. This will kind of be a 2-week lesson. So we'll do part 1 this week, where we can add registration, login, and then protection of resources, first depending on identity, and then second depending on user role. And then next week, we'll also look at adding in external authentication, so allowing users to sign in with providers such as Google, Facebook, Microsoft. And the things we're going to do over these next 2 classes, that's basically what you're going to need to implement into your assignment for assignment 2. So you're going to take the assignment 1 submission and you'll continue working with it for assignment 2. So we'll post that document, and I'll go over those requirements at the start of class next week. So a few things we'll kind of look at a high level before we start playing around with it. One is, I want to show you guys this. I'm not sure if we had a chance to look at it at all last semester. I don't think we did. And that is what's called the Owasp Top 10. Now, this hasn't been updated for a few years. But this is Owasp is a foundation that looks at web application security. So they've created an awareness document for developers like us, and they've basically done a survey to try and identify the largest risks. So what are the most common ways web applications are hacked or compromised? And then they make sort of recommendations around best practices for each one. So I think this project started around 10 years ago. There was a 2013 version. The latest version of the standard is from 2017. They're currently collecting data to come out with a 2020 version of the plan. So I'm not going to go into this in any sort of detail. But they list a lot of the common vulnerabilities, and we'll sort of, when we look at the infrastructure in that Microsoft gives us inside of Visual Studio, there are a lot of tools that address a number of these things. The things, we looked at this in our previous course. We looked at things like SQL injection. We've got to deal with cross-site scripting attacks. So that's something that, again, Visual Studio will give us some tools for some of these things. So a number of the things that are in the ASP.NET security libraries, they're going to speak to these application security risks. So I'm not going to go through all of these, but this is just here for you as a resource. It's something you should be aware of anytime you're building any kind of web application, regardless of what technology stack you're using. This is a good guidepost as to what things we need to be looking out for and taking care of in order to secure our applications. Okay. So that link is here in D2L for you. So I want to look kind of specifically at what does this look like in .NET. So ASP.NET ships with a series of libraries, a bunch of related packages that together are known as the identity framework. So identity framework kind of sits in between our front-end application and our back-end database. And identity is not only for web, we can use it also for desktop applications, for mobile apps. And it contains a series of libraries and classes that sit in between our database and our application. So we've basically got two packages that we're going to be working with in this class. The first one is the identity.core, and that's primarily concerned with user class and a role class for roles and permissions. And then underneath, we also have individual stores. We've got a user store and role store, and this works with the identity entity framework core library. So integrating with our database and managing those roles and those users in the database. Okay. So what we're going to do in our beer store, it kind of comes out of this tutorial series. So I've included the link in the slide. So basically what I've done is taken this tutorial from Microsoft and adapted it so that we can integrate these security concepts into the beer store application that we already have. So this link is here for you. It's a good reference if you are implementing ASP.NET Identity in another application. These are the official docs with screenshots and examples. So one of the fundamental concepts we need to think about when we're thinking about security is the difference and relationship between authentication and authorization. Now, when we built our PHP applications last semester, we did authentication, but we never really did authorization. So what's the difference between them, and what's the relationship between authentication and authorization? This would be a really common question that a junior developer or a co-op student might get in a job interview. So how would you answer that question? You can use your microphone or use the chat. Tell me what you think. Okay. The question, Zach, is on the slide. So what's the difference between authentication and authorization? Leo, that's a great answer. Although you've repeated authorization for both of those. So do you want to clarify that one, please? I think it was just a typo. Right. Thank you. So authentication is kind of level one in application security. So authentication is trying to identify who is this user. Is this an anonymous user, or do we know who they are? So that's kind of step one. And that's what we did in our PHP application. We built a register and a login page, and then we added code to some of our resources saying that if the user was logged in, we would show them the resource. Otherwise, we would send them back to a login screen. So that's basic authentication. Authorization is really the next level. So Once we've identified who the user is with an authentication process, authorization is then looking at what is this particular user allowed to do? What can they see and what can they do within the application? So we've really only done authentication. We haven't really done authorization before. Now, I'm just curious, in any of your other courses, have you worked with authorization at all in Java or any of your other courses? Okay, so you would have done some, yes, in SQL. That makes sense, Aiden. Okay, so probably not though, right. So in SQL, you've got roles and permissions with the database. Okay, but not in a front-end application that you built. Probably haven't done that with Java. Okay. So, schematically looks something like this in ASP.NET. We've got the identity library that's our first level is dealing with authentication, where we identify a user and we have different authentication types. So today we're working with local authentication, meaning the user credentials are stored in our database. Next week, we're going to be working with external authentication using a third-party service like a Google, a Microsoft. So there's our first level. And then our second level uses this principal object where once we know who someone is, we can also attach a role or series of roles to a particular user. So we typically have a one-to-many relationship there that one user can be in multiple roles. So the identity library, it actually gives us, and I think we've seen this already, it actually builds out a series of tables for us that all start with the prefix ASP.NET. So I know the diagram's a little hard to see here. I've recreated this diagram here on Blackboard. So here's what the table structure looks like. The primary table is this ASP.NET users table. And you can see from the diagram, these are the fields that come with the identity library by default. So ID, username, email. There's a Boolean field whether the email is confirmed. If we want to set it up so when users register, they can't automatically log in. They would have to confirm their email first. The passwords are hashed and also salted with a security stamp. We can store phone numbers, we can enable two-factor authentication, and we can also lock users out if we want. So this is our primary table we're going to work with. We've got a roles table as well, where we would define within our particular application what are the roles. For example, if we're building D2L, we'd have roles like student, faculty, administrator. We've got this junction table in between the ASP.NET user roles. So we've got, I think I misspoke earlier, this is a many-to-many relationship. One role can have many users, and one user can be in many roles. So this table represents one instance of a single user being placed into a single role. And then we've got a few other tables, claims, tokens, user logins. This is primarily used for third-party logins and claims. So we're not as concerned with some of these tables. We're primarily concerned with users, roles, and user roles. So we actually have these tables already in our database. So let's look at how they got there. I'm going to open up two projects. I'm going to open up the beer store project. So you can go ahead and open your beer store. I'm going to open up Management Studio so we can have a look at the database as well. So in my beer store, I'm just using a local instance of SQL Server. And in the beer store, I've got all these tables that you see in the diagram. I've got 6 tables that start with ASP.NET. Okay. So where did these tables come from? Remember, when we set up our project, we changed the authentication from none, and we changed it to individual user accounts. So what that does when we pick that option, that gives us this data folder, and inside of the migrations folder, it creates a migration automatically for us. No timestamp, all zeros, but it's all zeros _ create identity schema. If I open up that migration, you can actually see here's the migration script that builds the roles, users, all 6 of the ASP.NET tables. So this migration is added to our project automatically when we create a new project and change authentication from none to individual user accounts. We get this migration. So as soon as we run an update database migration, this script file runs and it builds the tables in our database. By contrast, I'll show you a project that I created. It's just a sample project where I just left the authentication empty. It didn't pick anything. So this is still a .NET Core web application, but I did not enable any authentication options at the time I created it. And if we look here, you notice I don't even have a data folder. So I don't have the data folder. I don't have my database connection file, this application DB context. Because we picked identity at project setup, we also got the shell of our database connection class. One of the other things we have in our beer store project is I also have this folder called areas. And under here, there's a folder for identity as well as for pages. So we haven't really worked with this yet. But by comparison, I don't have this section at all in my project with no authentication. The other big difference here in our beer store under Dependencies and Packages, we can see 2 packages that are related to handling security. We've got the Identity Entity Framework Core and the ASP.NET Core Identity.UI. So these components are also added to our project when we pick authentication at startup. In my other project, I don't even have any dependencies listed at all so far. So it is possible to set up a project without identity and go back and add these things later, but it's a lot of manual work. We'd be better off to just create a new project and pick the local authentication options right from the get-go. So the classes that we're primarily handling are the identity user class and the identity role class. So identity user maps to our ASP.NET users table, and our identity role, it maps to the ASP.NET user roles class. So we don't need to build models for these tables because the models, they're already part of this identity. They're part of this package already. So we already have access to these classes. We don't need to define regular controllers and models to work with the identity tables. These packages will do it for us, which makes coding really easy. So there's a couple of things we want to change here. And then we're going to try this out. In our startup file, we've already got our application configured to use ASP.NET Identity with our application DB context file. there's a couple of small changes we want to make in our startup.cs file. So let's open up that file. So it should be the very last item. I'll just actually close all my files. Let's open up startup.cs. And in startup, if you scroll down, should be the same lines as mine. For me, it's line 33 and 34. So I'm going to make two small changes here. The first one is, notice this default setting, sign-in.required confirm account equals true. So the default setting here is that when a new user registers, they have to receive and respond to a confirmation email before they can actually log in and use their account. We need to change this because we don't have a working mail server right now, so we're not going to be able to send out those confirmation emails right now. So to get around this, I'm just going to change on line 33, I'm just going to change true to false. So change line 33, and then let's start up the application. And because our site already uses the identity libraries, and I've run one migration and my database already has the tables, we should actually be able to register and log in without writing any code. So I'll start my site without debugging. Excuse me. So I just changed line 33. I just changed true to false here. So I'll start the app, and we've already got register and log in here again, because we picked authentication when we set up our project. It automatically gives us these links. So I'm going to go to register, and let's look at some of the features that are here. Maybe I'll create an account here. I'll call it user1@gc.ca, and I'll try the password test. Notice right away it uses a jQuery validator to tell me the default password rules, which we can override, but default password, 6 characters between 6 and 100. So if I set the password as test and test, I'll try to create this account. And some additional validation runs tells me that it enforces a strong password. So I've got to have at least one special character, at least one digit, and at least one upper and lowercase password. So I'll create another account. And this time I'm going to follow the password rules. So I've made sure to use a special character, a number, an upper, a lower, and my password is at least 6 characters. So now you notice my register and login links have gone away. It says hello and my email address, and I now have log out. Now, did I actually create an account? Let's go and see. So I'll open up Management Studio. And in my tables, if I right-click my ASP.NET users, I can select my top 1,000 rows. And now I've got a user account. So the user IDs are not numeric. With identity, they're GUIDs, they're globally unique identifiers. It's got my username. It's hashed my password and also used this security stamp to salt it. So that way the password hash will always be unique. So it looks like my account got created. Well, let's try. I'll try to log out, and then I'll try to log back in with that credential. So I'll click log out, click log in. And my login seems to work because, again, it's recognized my username. What if I put in, an email that doesn't exist? Try to log in, and it tells me my login is invalid. So a lot of the infrastructure that we would need here, it's already here. It's enforcing strong passwords, it's salting and hashing. It properly is validating our login attempts. I'm going to go back to register, and now I'm going to try to register a second account using the same email address. So I'm going to try again. And Identity does a duplicate check for me. It makes sure that my usernames are unique. It won't allow me to save a second user account with the same email address. One other thing I should point out is how Identity by default stores the logins. So let me go here, go to my login page. I'll open up Edge for a minute. So I'm going to log in Edge. Okay. So I've got my Edge version open. I'm logged into the site. As I browse around, my username stays visible in the nav bar. Now I'm going to close the browser out. So Edge is closed. I'm going to come back to it. And I'll go back to the site. I'll go back to the home page. Hang on just a second. I'm going to have to try this in a couple different browsers. Okay, so in Edge, when I close my browser, I'm logged out. I'm going to try this in Chrome. Let's bring Chrome over here. So I'm an anonymous user in Chrome. So I'm logged in. Close my browser. And come back. So you'll notice if you close the browser, it doesn't. See if we try to click remember. So I'm logged in. So we have the option, if we click remember, that it will use a cookie, right? So when I use a cookie, my login persists even if I close my browser or turn my computer off. And we can also customize and override those cookie settings. If, let's say, we want them to expire sooner, we can do that. Okay, so it's using a combination of sessions and cookies for this. Okay. So this is fairly simple because we haven't really done anything. I changed one word in the code. I changed true to false on line 33. So what we want to do now is make some changes to the application. We'll come back to the rules a bit later. We're just going to deal with authentication first. So what we want to do is look at how do we control access to parts of the website based on whether the user is logged in or not. So I've got my one user account here. And last week, for a couple weeks ago, we scaffolded out. We created categories and products controllers. So right now, these are public, but we want to change our application so only a user that's logged in can access the products and categories. So the first thing we'll do, let's open up our layout file. So let's open up views and shared. Let's open our layout and let's add links in the navigation bar that go to our categories and products controllers. So I'll open up my layout, and underneath my store link, I want to add two more links. The first one, I'm going to change the controller to say categories. So I'm going to change the controller and the text in my link. The second one is going to say products. There we go here. So there's the link on Pastebin if you need them. It's a little easier to see. Somebody suggested this in my class yesterday, that it's easier to read the code on Pastebin than from the chat. So we'll try it this way. You guys can give me some feedback, which is easier for you. Okay, so I've added these two links to the nav bar. So now when I refresh the site, whoops, this link should say products. Okay, good to know, Leo. Maybe I'll try that one. I forgot to change my last link. That should say products and this should say index. All right, we'll try paste of code. No. Okay. Okay, so I fixed the link. Yeah, I'll have to play around with these tools. So now I'll have a categories link. And I'll have a products link. So now I want to control access to these links so only a user who is logged in can see them. So I want to add an if statement into the layout that shows or hides these links depending on if the user is anonymous or logged in. This is pretty easy to do. So in our view, we can simply check if our user.identity.is authenticated. So above this, so I'm going to wrap these two links inside this condition. So now, if I'm logged in, I should see the categories and products links. If I'm anonymous, those links should be hidden. So in Firefox, I'm browsing anonymously because it doesn't show me a username or log out. It shows register and log in. So now my links disappear. In Chrome, where I'm logged in, I can now see both of the links. So to show or hide things in our views, depending on whether the user's logged in or not, we can just use this code. Is our user's identity authenticated? When they're logged in, that will be true. When they're not logged in, that will be false. We don't need a session variable or anything like that. So in Firefox, I'm anonymous, so I can't see those links. But notice, I can actually still get to them. Even though I can't see my categories link in the nav bar, I can still load all the pages. So .NET has a really elegant solution for this. Let's say we want to control access to everything in the categories controller. That anonymous users shouldn't be able to see and call any of the methods here or load any of the views, whereas an authenticated user can do all of it, can do everything. How do we do it? Well, at the controller level, we can add this authorize attribute at the top of our class. And by doing that, it makes all of the methods inside the class private. So let's try that. So I'll put in my full if statement here, or I'll actually maybe just leave the code up for a minute before we do that. I know a few people who did complete the feedback survey said occasionally you need a little more time, so I'll try to go a bit more slowly. And by all means, you can stop me in the chat if you need to see the code for just a little bit longer. No problem. If things are going a bit too fast, just let me know. if your navigation bar links are working now, that a logged in user can see them and an anonymous user can't, I want you to open up your categories controller file. And that's where I'm going to go next. So in my controllers and categories controller, line 13, here's our class definition. To make the entire controller private, I can just add the authorize decorator, which gives me an error. I just need to accept the reference suggestion to Microsoft.ASP.NET Core.Authorization. If I click that, it adds the reference on line 10, and I'll save. So now I want to go back and try this in both my browsers. In Firefox, I'm anonymous, and in Chrome, I'm logged in. So what should happen now in Firefox? Let me go back here. So if I refresh my page now in Firefox as an anonymous user, what do you expect is going to happen? I'm browsing anonymously. Okay, so Leo, you think it'll get... You cheated? Okay, so I'm going to now try and load my categories page again. Yeah, you were supposed to predict it first. So I'm browsing anonymously in Firefox, and now when I try to go to categories, I get redirected to the login screen. But if we look at our URL, there's still something useful here. It now adds this parameter on the end, return URL equals categories. So it knows which URL I tried to access. So if I log in now, it will take me back to the page I tried to access. So now once I'm authenticated, it takes me where I tried to go. So many sites will do this. So not only does this authorize control access, but it also keeps track of where are anonymous users trying to go, and if they log in successfully, they'll automatically get taken to that resource. So now I'm logged in again. I can go anywhere. If I log out, any place I try to go in categories, say I try to go to category/create, doesn't matter which method in the controller I call, I'm blocked from all of them because we've set that authentication at the controller level. And sometimes it might be useful to do that. There may be nothing in the controller that's public. We want to secure everything inside. In that case, adding the authorized decorator right at the class level makes sense. Now, we also have the ability to control access at the individual method level. So we've got a whole bunch of methods here in our controller, right? We've got excluding the constructor, basically 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. There's 8 methods here that are involved in CRUD operations. I would say there's probably one method that would be safe to make private. Which one of the methods in this list, sorry, to make public, which method would be safe to make a public method? Okay, potentially Aiden. We could, yeah, Stella, I tend to agree that maybe details, because if we look at the details method, I'm logged in here, So Aiden, we could make this one public. Not a bad idea. But the user is still going to have all these links, which they shouldn't really see. But on details, however, they can't actually add, edit, or delete any data. So details we're going to make public just so we can see how do we override that class level authentication that we've got on line 15. So I'll scroll down to details, or you can choose it from the dropdown. Our details method should start on line 32. So we're going to add a different annotation here. Here we're going to use allow anonymous. So we're going to override the class level auth check to make this method public. Okay. So I need to be logged in now to access any of the methods in the categories controller except details. So what does this look like? So I'm anonymous. So I can't go to categories. However, I can go to categories/details and put in a valid category ID. So as an anonymous user, I can look at a category, but I can't change anything. If I try to click either of these links that are in the scaffolded view, I get redirected to log in. So we'd probably remove these links from the details view, really. I realize it's not that useful because I have to type this URL manually. There's no way for a user to get here otherwise. But I just wanted to show how allow anonymous works. So any declaration at the method level will override any declaration at the class level, much like a variable, right? If we declare a class level variable and then redeclare that same variable within a method, then what's declared at the method level is going to take precedence. Same thing with authorize and allow anonymous. The method level declaration will override the class level declaration. So that's pretty simple. Now I should probably do the same thing in the product controller. My product controller, we've added authorized to the categories controller. Associated entry produced by the create method. Not today, but if you remind me, we can do it next week. In general, you'll have to do two things. In the model, so let's say every product was associated to a user, we would need a user ID as a string. And when saving that item, you would manually set the user ID property equal to the user.identity name field. That would give you the user's email address. That's the simplest way to do it. Good question. So I'm going to go to my product controller, products controller, and I'm just going to add that one line at the top at class level. So my class declaration is on line 15. I'm going to add authorize here as well. So now as an anonymous user, I can't change any products or categories in the store. I cannot go in, find my favorite beer, and set the price to 1 cent as an anonymous user. Okay. So as I'm anonymous, I can no longer access anything in my product controller either. The store is public, but the categories and products, the management of the store, that's now private. Okay. So we've enabled basic authentication where we've maybe added 5 lines of code. So the only things that we've done here, we've changed our account sign up so it doesn't require an email confirmation. We've added a couple links in our nav bar and set them so that only authenticated users can see them. And then we've modified our categories and products controllers to require authentication, that a user who's logged in can make changes, but an anonymous user can't. So that's kind of our first level. Now, this still isn't really very secure. Why isn't it not very secure? It's a good first step, but what's wrong with it? Or what's it missing? Right. Anybody can come to the site and register, and as long as they've registered, they can then make changes to the categories or products. So we've kind of done the basics around authentication, but what we really need is we need a second level, which is authorization. We need a couple of different roles where only someone in an administrative role can modify the products and categories. So that's what we're going to do the next hour of class. Okay. So I'm going to stop the recording. I will push the changes that I've made so far up to GitHub. I'm going to take a 10-minute break, and we'll come back at 3:05, and we'll look at adding that second level of authorization.